Hello, everyone. My name is Tooways Asmal. Welcome to the first episode in 2025 of Two Ways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. Now, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be available on podcast by tomorrow. For those listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave a rating for the podcast. Now, if you're joining us live, drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Moira Mhlarhi, a chartered accountant based in Bermuda. She's also a qualified CPA. She also shares tips for graduates on LinkedIn. So if you haven't seen her yet, go and check her out. Moira, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Let's jump straight into it. Tell us your
Mhm.
story. Where do you come from? And even outside of work, who is Moira Mhlarhi? Give us the backstory.
Okay, so I'm originally from Limpopo, a small town called Zanin. Grew up there, born and raised, did all my primary schooling and high schooling there. And then after that, I decided to go to UCT, so in the Western Cape, University of Cape Town. I did my BCom accounting degree as well as my postgraduate diploma in accounting there. I loved it for the most part, but what I do have to say is was a bit of an initial culture shock when I first joined. But overall, it was a great experience. After that, I moved to Joburg for work. People had told me that Joburg is the place to be, opportunities abound. So I moved to Joburg to go and do my training, my chartered accounting training articles at KPMG. So I was at KPMG for 3 years within the financial services division. So my main portfolio of clients was insurance. Did some of the bigger clients, including reinsurance, and then I also had like a few here and there that were diversified. So maybe like some cash in transit, some retail banking, some venture capitalist types of clients. Towards the end of my third year while I was at KPMG was going through a rough time. So that was the time of many scandals. And the KPMG in Cape Town was short staffed. So what they did was they asked if anybody would want to come through. So I was one of those people who said, yes, I'm willing to go. I went to Cape Town for a few months. So I was based there towards the end of my articles. I was based there for a few months. I had a few asset management clients there, and got to see what it's like to work in Cape Town versus study in Cape Town, which I also found quite good and I enjoyed. And then yeah, moved back to Joburg. I At the time I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next, so I remember I had an interest in doing IT audit, so I applied for an internal audit secondment or an internal transfer to go and do IT audit while at KPMG. So I got accepted. I moved to the client. I enjoyed it. I got a first-hand experience of what it's like to be an IT auditor, what sort of qualifications you need to do, like CISA, and I got a feel of whether or not it was for me. But I think at the back of my mind, I still had an idea that I wanted to go overseas and work because I knew I didn't want to finish my articles and immediately venture into private practice or practice, if you can call it that. So a company called Cross Country Consulting reached out to me on LinkedIn and they let me know that they do secondments, audit secondments, but the difference is they do the recruitment part and then they go and sort of like um, put you forth to big four companies or top 10 companies, but it's mainly big four companies. So I joined Cross Country Consulting with them in their practice. I was based in Chicago, and what they do or with what they did when I joined them, which was 2020, is they had like a big onboarding program. So I think there were 60 of us consultants from different big four firms across South Africa and all, I guess, similar age groups. We started off in Washington where we did the onboarding program. And then after that, a few people flew to their different states. So my state was Chicago. I was based in Chicago, still within financial services. So still doing insurance. I was auditing, I think it was the second biggest insurance client at the time in America, and the hours were rough. So we were doing like 80-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks on my very first day, left at 9 p.m. and it just progressively got worse after that. So it was 10, 11, 12, 1, 2. And yeah, I learned firsthand that they really do work crazy hours in America. They really do prioritize that. So I did that. As I mentioned, it was COVID. I think it was sometime in March. My friends and I were actually free. We had signed our big clients. We said we are going to go and visit New York to go and just see what it's like see the place. So we did that, not knowing that within the next few days, they'll announce that there's something called COVID. We don't know what it is. And we just advised that everybody stay in their homes, in their houses after that. So luckily, I'd flown back to Chicago And things from that point just started slowing down. Like our clients were saying, no, it's fine. You can work from home. You don't come into the office. And the company communicated that they also were not sure because their clients were not sure what was going to happen next. So the secondment itself was supposed to be a few months, which it ended up being a few months. But what happened towards the end was that flights were being cancelled, like all commercial flights got cancelled. We had booked flights. They said, no, we're not sure if we're going to do refunds or not. So the people that well, some people got their money back, some didn't. Some people would go to the airport on the day of flying and get stuck there and not go anywhere. And that's what happened. So we ended up being repatriated, which basically means that you chart like a local flight, which is SAA, and then we pay SAA instead. So we pay you your initial flight, whatever money you got, you lost, and then you pay SAA, and SAA took us home. We went into quarantine. I don't even know if anybody remembers quarantine, but quarantine where it's like 14 days. You know, people are dressed in these like white suits and masks, and you get in a facility or something, and they bring you food and they're fully covered. So that's what we did for 2 weeks. And after that, job markets were very different. Like things were very slow because life was uncertain. So I was still thinking about what to do next. Luckily, because I had insurance experience, insurance was one of those fields at the time that was still having a demand. In fact, they had a greater demand because of COVID. So I got a job at an insurance company called Bright Insurance Company, and the role was within reinsurance accounting. I did reinsurance accounting there for 3.5 years, shy of 4 years. I really enjoyed it. Reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies, just to clarify for those who don't know. I really enjoyed it. It was a very good, detailed experience. It touched on various sort of like facets within finance. So I would work closely with like financial operations, management accounting, maybe financial accounting. And then towards the end of that, I got an interest in doing management accounting. So luckily things worked out. There was a role that was available for a head of management accounting, which is what I applied to and I got. I got into the head of management accounting position. I had 3 direct reports. So what we do is like your annual budgeting and forecasting, as well as like monthly management accounts, cost control, expense reporting. So I did that, and I still had, even though like a few years had passed by that point in time, possibly now we were closer to like 3.5 years, I still felt that sort of desire to go overseas. I felt a bit shortchanged because of what had happened during
Okay.
COVID. So, because I have insurance experience, Bermuda kept popping up. Bermuda is one of the biggest markets of insurance in the world. I
Okay.
think they do the biggest reinsurance globally. So, like all different jurisdictions would reinsure a lot of their risks in Bermuda. So I researched. I was outside of audit. For those who don't know, I think you get 18 months. Like if you're outside of audit for 18 months, generally they don't take you in for overseas secondments. So I was looking at specifically finance secondments, not audit secondments. And the company that I'm with came up, Acumen Consulting, and they said, yes, we do finance secondments. So what they do is they take you on and they contract you out to their clients. So you get like a variety of clients. It's not predetermined. It's not like you know what you're going to get at the end, but like you go and interview for different roles depending on what comes up. It could be financial accounting, which I've done. It could be reinsurance accounting, which I've done, or anything else in between. So I've done all of those. So that's like a summary of my career journey. And then in general, I'm somebody who is very active. I like being active while in Bermuda. Luckily, Bermuda has a very active environment. So I do a lot of like running outside. Um, I am a very faith oriented person. So I do a lot of like church activities, volunteering, that type of thing. And yeah, that's who I am in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned something at the beginning that I thought was quite interesting. You
Yeah.
said the the difference between working in Cape Town versus studying in Cape Town. I haven't heard anyone
Yes.
mention that. So unpack that a
Yes.
little bit for me, please.
I think a lot of people do study in Cape Town, but not a lot of them work in Cape Town because of maybe they're not sure if it aligns up with their their background, if I can call it that. Because I know Cape Town specializes specifically in financial services within asset management space. So for people who want to do banking, they end up moving to Joburg because banking is quite big in Joburg. So that's one of the things, but also just having money to do things. Like when you're studying, you don't have a lot of money to do things.
Okay.
A lot of the places that you want to go to are far out of reach. So like a Cape Point, for example, is very far. You don't just go there. There were no, well, there were taxis at the time, but Uber was not quite a thing. Like, shows how bad it is. So I found that when you work there, it's more enjoyable because you can enjoy like the activities of the city. Say like the hiking. I know I remember doing hiking, Lion's Head, and things like that. So it's more enjoyable from that perspective. But I also find that because when you're a student, it's very diversified. Like you have people from all over. I know we had different nationalities represented, but working is a lot different. I don't think it's as diverse as like what it is when you're a student. So yeah, those are my experiences while I was there.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's definitely something interesting that somebody can take away from that. But
Yeah.
let's move a little bit about like moving to Bermuda. What was it like fitting in? Is the work similar or the people similar, or does it take a lot to kind of adapt?
So I would say accounting is a universal language. So even when I was still in audit and I moved to Chicago, you don't really struggle that much with transitioning in terms of like technical perspective. If anything, maybe the language might be different. I know here they would call it like property casualty insurance instead of short term insurance, but essentially it's still insurance. Debits are debits, credits are credits. So I don't think anyone struggles from adjusting at a work perspective. I think the biggest challenges will always come in with social adjusting or like adjusting socially or like culture shock, if I can call it that. I had learned from my experience the first time around when I went to the US. So I knew I knew what to do coming back the second time around, which is things around like making sure that you're not isolated, like make sure that you go in with the mindset that you're going to do specific things that you don't end up isolated. Because what happens is when you're at home in South Africa, you have like your friends, you have your family, and you don't necessarily need to make an effort after a while to see people. But when you move to a new country, everybody has their own family groups, specifically in Bermuda. Bermuda is so small, everybody is almost related. They have their long standing friendships, everybody grew up together, so it's difficult to acclimate to that type of environment. You need to make a conscious effort to do so, whether that's picking up a sport. I initially picked up netball, or maybe volunteering. I volunteer at church just to make sure, attending small group or whatever it is that you do. Some people could be gym or something like that. Make sure that you don't stay isolated, because it could make you have a shorter experience than what you intended, because you don't have that support system. Another thing that I would say is just realizing like how far home is relative to where we are. So Bermuda is a British territory, but it's closer to the US. So it's like a few hours, maybe like 2 hours flight to New York. And in terms of South Africa, we are 6 hours behind to South Africa. And getting to South Africa, I think the quickest flight, which is from New York to South Africa, is about 14 hours to go. But
Oh,
then
I've
from here
done
to
that.
New York, you need to do another. Oh, you've done that.
Yeah, the rough one.
It's very rough. It's very rough. So from here to New York, you need to factor in, or that specific airport, another 3 hours. There's layovers in between. So at best, you can get home in 24 hours. And even with that, you'd need to plan. It's not like I can just wake up tomorrow and say I'm going home. You need to plan. You need to submit your leave. So that's something to think about or to factor, like when you go away from home, is that a home is not as accessible. Even if you say, oh, it's a flight away, if you book a flight last minute, the prices rack up. I know up to December, prices were skyrocketing. They go from $3,500. That's not small change. You don't just pack up and say, I'm going home. So it's something to think about, that you might not come home as often as you want to. So go with that mindset to say, maybe it's a sacrifice, or maybe you're doing a few years or something. You're not going to go home as frequent as you'd like to go. Those are some of the things that I would say come up.
Okay. What's something maybe you wish you had known before traveling and working in another country?
Ooh, this is a good one. Okay, I would say research is important. Research, research, research. And if you think you've done enough, do more research. You can never do too much research. I think don't look at people's LinkedIn posts and think, oh, this person is so happy. And now you want to uproot your whole life and go overseas because you saw somebody's LinkedIn post. At the end of the day, my name is attached to that post. Whoever's name is attached to that post. So there's certain things that they might not say in public with many following. But if you ask people who've actually gone, I can tell you the second time around I did it. The first time around, I didn't do it. When I went to Chicago, I didn't reach out to people and ask them, like, what was your experience? But because I learned the hard way, The second time around, I reached out to a few people on LinkedIn who had been to Bermuda and say, hey, what did you think of the place? What could you have done differently? Like, what are some advices or tips that you'd give to me? And some of them are very helpful. And I see why they said what they said after having arrived, right? So you get a different perspective when you reach out to people on LinkedIn. People are generally responsive if you reach out with detailed questions. And you can say, hi, these are the questions that I have about it. Do you have time to answer them? And people generally reach out if you do that type of research. Another one is making sure that when you research at a similar level. So if you're an accountant, say accountant in Bermuda instead of saying Bermuda in general, because Bermuda is like a large scale of people. You could get the ultra rich people, being on social media, but that's not going to be your day to day reality once you move over. So when you do the research, make sure that you specify, like, for whatever position you're going through for, whether that's accounting in Bermuda or senior in Bermuda, to get like the right level of advice. A third one I would say is around having savings. Uh, you can never have too much savings. If anything, you can always spend it later. But make sure that you have the savings. The costs rack up quite quickly, especially because the currency is stronger. So they use USD here. So for them, it might be $200 for a visa or $180 for you to apply for visa. But for us, that translates to a lot of money and very quickly. So there's visa costs that come up. There's police clearance costs. They need medical reports, doctors' reports. Likely the company that you go with usually will sponsor the flight that you need to go. But even after arriving, say you arrive in the US like they usually do and then fly over the next day, you might need to have like an incidental charge at the hotel, and that's like $100. Like for them, $100 is nothing, but for you,
Mhm.
you're like $100 is a lot of money.
A lot.
Like you can't just ask me $100 after bleeding so many costs. So moving overseas is expensive. Like make sure you have like some pot of savings on standby just to carry yourself through.
Okay, good advice. For the audience, we'll be responding to questions towards the end, so please add your questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them. Um, let's just see. So, I see you also a CPA in Bermuda. So, talk to us a little bit
Yes.
about CPA in Bermuda. Is it the same as being a CPA in the US? Can you practice as a CPA in the US with your Bermuda CPA qualification?
No, so it's not the same as CPA US, but it's the same as CPA Canada. So what they do is they'll ask you when you first apply, like what existing professional body you have, whether it's CASA or ACCA or other bodies, and they go and evaluate that against the criteria of bodies. And generally, a CASA is like a one-to-one with a CPA Bermuda. So it's more of a registration process. But for those that are not at a one to one level, maybe there might be some exams or things that you need to take to do that. But with a CPA Bermuda, you can practice in Canada. So it's a one to one with Canada also. So
Okay,
yeah,
so then it's definitely worth the registration.
yeah, definitely. And there's
Yeah.
fees attached to that too. So
Oh,
again, save. $400 is not a joke.
if you remember nothing else, save.
Save.
So I noticed over the last few months on LinkedIn that you've been sharing tips for graduates. Firstly, love
Yes.
it.
Thank
Why
you.
did you
Thank you.
start doing it?
I think there's a lot of things that we all experience when you first went around that you wish somebody would have told you or that you wish you would have known. And I think what happens is with a lot of people that are first generation in corporate, like let's say you didn't have parents that were working in corporate has a lot of unspoken rules that people operate by that you'll find yourself learning the hard way if people don't tell you, right? So it was from a point of like wishing that I had had somebody do that. And in some ways later on, I think people did do that for me. And I just wanted to transfer that knowledge like onto others to be that hand holder or that big sister for those that don't have that in their lives, in their immediate circle. So yeah.
People don't realize like that we didn't have mentors. As it
Not at
was
all.
when you're the first or the first, there's no mentors. You just have to be swimming in the dark trying to figure
You
things
make it
out.
work. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And let's talk secondment. So I know you've done like the long second, but like I know you get the 3, 6 month, 2 years. In
Mm-hmm.
your opinion, and obviously it's a little bit biased, but number one, are they worth it? And which type
Mm-hmm.
is the best and which type is, I wouldn't say the worst, but which one would you avoid?
Okay, like you said, I am biased. Are they worth it? I would definitely say 100%. If you have to talk about the difference between not doing them and doing them, at least say you've done it and you didn't like it than to say that you wanted to do it but you held back because you were scared. So if that's the place that you find yourself in, you want to do it but you're scared, you're not sure if you'll make it or you'll cut it or anything like that, do it. It's definitely worth it. And then I think it's highly dependent on where you go. So I know the US takes a lot of people. There's a lot of long working hours in the US. It's actually notorious for that, like having harsh working conditions in terms of hours, not because of anything else. But in terms of pay, it definitely like racks up, especially looking at the exchange rate, because you know the dollar's that much stronger than ours. So even just like a few months, even if it's 4 months or 6 months, can set you up quite nicely to go back home with those savings, whether you want to pay off your house. I know a few people paid off their houses when they went to the secondment we did. Other people went in with a goal of paying off student loans, so they came back, all their student loans were paid. So even just for monetary benefit alone, it's worth it. Number two, for personal development purposes, I think it definitely will put you um, in a different mind frame because it's different. Like I had, lived and studied in Cape Town. I'd worked in Joburg. I'm from Limpopo, so I thought I'm fine. I'll definitely make it overseas. It's the same thing. It's not the same
No.
thing. It's not the same thing at all. I think you don't realize the importance of certain connections, whether it's family, whether it's friend, or just knowing that you can go home. Like what that feels like until you go overseas, or even just like walking around, seeing people that look like you and sound like you. I think when you're on the other side, you get to a place, nobody looks like you, nobody sounds like you. That can make you have like empathy for people who are expats and foreigners within your country, for one. It can make you independent. It can also teach you like valuable things just because life is different elsewhere. Like people have different priorities. Like maybe they're more technologically advanced, and they have other things. You could save your money and go and travel, all those things, personal development, not necessarily career wise. And then from a third perspective, I think from a career also, it definitely like stands out. Like if you can adapt to working in any other jurisdiction, whether it's the US, UK, I don't have any doubts that you can adapt to working at my company because you have adaptability. You've demonstrated that. So it's just a surefire way of doing that. In terms of whether short term or long term secondment, I would say if you've never been out of the country, which I had never been out of the country, do short term. Do short term because you don't know how you react. I, for one, was traumatized after I came back from the US, especially because of the pandemic. I was like, this is not happening. They're not canceling all commercial flights. So something like that can shock you because you realize that I don't have friends or family within this country. Like, if your contract runs out and you don't have money, what will happen to you? So things like that are things that you'd never think about at home because someone will take you in, like somebody will bring you home. So do short-term secondment, get a feel for it to see if it's something that you're interested in, and then after that you can look into like maybe longer term options. And then hopefully by the time that you're looking into longer term options, like if you do get a chance to visit, which I know for a lot of people it's not feasible because of our currency, but if you do get a chance to, I don't know, visit a few countries after that and you still decide it's within something that you want to do, like your risk appetite, then I'd say go for it.
Okay. Okay. As we're coming towards the end, any last few words from you or anything we didn't discuss that you'd like the audience to know?
So I'd say, like, as a start point for everybody, no matter where you are in your career, whether you're a student or like you're working or you a few years into the game, I would say find one or two people that you can talk to, not too far ahead. Right. So I think there's this tendency of maybe somebody who's a student wanting somebody who's already qualified as a CA to mentor them. And what I usually say is that person is so far out, they can't necessarily relate to your day to day struggles that you're currently going through. Right. They've passed, things have long changed. ITC is no longer ITC, it's something else now. Like I can't necessarily relate to you at that level, but if you are a first year and somebody's in third year, they can tell you how to get to where they are. And you don't necessarily need to know the whole page because by the time you arrive, things have changed. Maybe you don't want the career that some of us had, you want your own thing. So find a mentor who's only like one or two steps ahead of you. It doesn't necessarily have to be mentoring in the technical sense. I know people get put off by that word mentoring. They say, oh, I can't find anyone, I don't have anyone in my family. it's just building a relationship with somebody who's one or two steps ahead. And I think looking back, I had people like that, whether I was an article or some of my AICs, or maybe I was a student, somebody was in second and third year, and they'd give me tips to say, you know, apply for vac work. That's something that a senior student told me. It's something that I didn't know that changed my life. Specifically for students, I would say apply for vac work. It makes a big difference. I think a lot of people look at it and think, oh, it's just nothing. You don't even do anything at work. If anything, you start off learning how to interview. Okay. By the time you move on to a role, you have those skills that differentiate you from others. So you learn how to interview. You're working in a diverse environment with other people, people at different age groups. That's a skill set that you have that other people don't have. For others, it could be it's your first time in audit. You get to see what audit is like, and you decide that it's not for you because you did an audit vac work program, or at that point in time that I have no ambitions to become an audit partner. It's still giving you insight that you wouldn't have had if you had not done like your audit vac work program, right? And then yeah, I think those are the main ones. Like find a mentor, and then yeah, do vacation work experience.
And I remember going for back work, and I remember the most important thing I learned is I do not want to be in financial services. That was
Really?
that helped me a lot. That helped me a lot. So I'm glad I did my back
You
work. Let's put
see,
it that.
that's a testimony on its own. Yeah, definitely.
But I think that's a great way to end. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that it's added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Moira, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us for another